Welcome back to The Explainer. I want you to imagine a truly nightmare scenario. The worst has actually happened. After the floodwaters recede from the catastrophic failure of the world's largest power station, after the devastating human toll is counted, and the immediate crisis finally, mercifully stabilizes, the world is left staring down an almost unthinkable engineering and civilizational question. Do we rebuild it? Now, I know that sounds like a straightforward yes or no question, right? But as we're about to dive into, the answer is this fascinating, near impossible web of massive technical hurdles, deep geological mysteries, and really complex human barriers. Reconstructing something like the Three Gorges Dam wouldn't just be a simple redo. It would literally be an entirely new, completely unprecedented mega engineering puzzle. So here is our roadmap for today. We're going to look at the surface challenge, the compromised geology, the political barriers, and finally, the distributed alternative.
Let's jump right into part one, the surface challenge.
Okay, so the original construction of this dam was an absolute marvel. It took 12 years, requiring over 27 million cubic meters of concrete and moving over 100 million cubic meters of earth. That's mind-boggling scale. But here's the catch with reconstruction. You aren't starting with a nice, clean, blank slate. Before you can pour a single drop of new concrete, engineers face an absolutely grueling cleanup phase. We're talking hazardous underwater demolition, extracting millions of tons of twisted, mangled steel, and safely scooping out mountains of potentially toxic sediment from the downstream flood zone. Just clearing the site is an excavation project that rivals the original build itself. Which brings us to our second layer, part two, compromised geology. The original dam was anchored to something called the Huangling anticline, basically a massive, solid slab of granite bedrock. But after a catastrophic failure, this bedrock has to undergo some seriously critical reassessment. We essentially have to figure out if the traumatized Earth will even accept a second megastructure. Because the rock sitting down there today, it is definitely not the same untouched granite it was back in the 1990s. And the reason that rock has changed so much brings us to a really vital concept: reservoir-induced seismicity. This refers to actual earthquakes that are literally triggered by the immense weight and water pressure of a massive man-made reservoir just pressing down on the Earth's crust. For decades, this bedrock has endured an invisible, relentless torment. You have to think of the geology here not as static, unchanging stone, but as a living system that has been completely shattered. That foundation is likely permanently compromised. Why? Well, it absorbed over 10,000 of those mini earthquakes we just talked about. It suffered through decades of these intense loading and unloading cycles as the massive water levels rose and fell every year. And then it had to absorb the ultimate catastrophic stress of the dam actually snapping. Microfractures in the rock have propagated deep into the earth, and underground drainage systems, called karst conduits, have dangerously expanded. Basically, the rock that supported the first dam simply cannot safely support a second one. Navigating all those geological hurdles creates a totally staggering timeline. Just testing the foundation involves immense technical hurdles. Imagine engineers trying to drill deep core samples through an active, flooded disaster zone just to map out those new microfractures. That assessment and remediation phase alone would take 2 to 5 years. Easy. Add another 10 to 15 years for the actual construction, and you are looking at 15 to 20 years minimum before a replacement is up and running. Oh, and it comes with a cool $50 to $100 billion price tag. Moving on to part 3, political barriers. I want you to consider this number for a second, 67.75%. That was the approval rating the original dam project received back in 1992. Now, in a legislative body that normally rubber stamps state projects with something like 99% approval, this was literally the lowest parliamentary vote in Chinese legislative history. So it's pretty clear that significant opposition to this mega project existed right from day one. Now, fast forward to our post-failure scenario. The political opposition to rebuilding would be, frankly, overwhelming. You have the grieving families, the devastated flooded communities, the original engineers who warned about the risks in the first place, and an international community demanding total transparency. Impartially speaking, the political cost for any government to point to a site where a tragedy of that scale occurred and say, hey, let's build the exact same thing again right here, would be virtually insurmountable. Now, you might be wondering, wait a minute, haven't failed dams been rebuilt before? And yes, they have. The Bangshan Dam failed back in 1975, a tragedy with massive loss of life, and it was rebuilt. But the comparison kind of falls apart when you look at the sheer scale. Bangshan was a relatively small dam, and its failure was tied to freak weather and fixable construction defects. The Three Gorges is just a completely different magnitude of disaster. The complex failure modes would permanently alter the risk calculus of both the public and the state. It's a totally different beast. Which brings us to our final section, Part 4, the distributed alternative. So, if the Earth is too shattered and the human cost is just too high to rebuild, what on earth is the alternative? How do you replace 22,500 megawatts of clean power? Well, the alternative is actually something that's already being done. The Three Gorges Dam provided 22,500 megawatts, sure. But look at the Jinshai River Cascade. It's a distributed network of 4 smaller dams upstream, and it already generates 38,500 megawatts. This distributed network completely dwarfs the capacity of the massive single dam.
Rather than relying on one massive, vulnerable wall, this distributed approach achieves power generation and flood control through a much safer network of smaller reservoirs, levees, and diversion channels. Yes, absolutely, it might require more total investment and a lot more complex management to coordinate multiple sites, but the trade-off, it's safety. This networked infrastructure makes sure we don't concentrate civilizational risk into one single point of failure that could threaten hundreds of millions of people downstream.
Which brings us to this incredibly profound thought from our source material. Quote, "The irony would be complete. The catastrophic failure of the world's largest dam would vindicate the engineers who argued against building it in the first place." Back in the 80s and 90s, many engineers proposed exactly this kind of distributed alternative. If the Great Dam were to fall, the river essentially just returns to being managed through a resilient network, rather than being forcefully controlled by a single monolith. So, let's bring it all back to our initial question, now armed with all these technical and human realities. Could a failed Three Gorges Dam be rebuilt through the shattered bedrock and millions of tons of twisted steel? Maybe. But the real question is, should we ever again concentrate that much civilizational risk into one single point of failure? I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts on this down below. Make sure to subscribe for our next explainer, where we're going to dive even deeper into how humans fundamentally calculate risk. See you there.